I would propose that there's like four main, there's sub branches of these, but there's four main approaches or answers we can have to basically this problem we have here, right? Of can we trust our perceptions? Can we trust our memories? Can we trust anything that we consider knowledge, right? So we could, one approach, and this is unfortunately all too common today, is we could accept the skeptical view and say that, well, because we can't prove that these perceptions are real, we're not dreaming, that we're not just, in some simulation, we're not a brain in a bat being zapped different perceptions around us, because we can't prove any of those. Because the reason you can't prove any of those is any evidence you could come up with that tries to prove that is consistent with the view in which that is the case, right? There's because the only evidence we have is what we perceive, right? So that's the problem. There's other things we can prove that are just internal to ourselves. So like, obviously Descartes, thinking is, and, proving that you're a thinking being is something you can do, but that's not the same as what you perceive, right?
Right.
So one approach is we could accept that, and that's essentially nihilism at that point. It's like, we can't know anything. I would propose that's not the right approach, but that's, like I said, unfortunately all too common today.
Yeah, nihilism, you can't perceive anything. There's no objective truth. I mean, that's a dangerous road.
Okay, so we don't need to go too far down that road. I figured we wouldn't spend much time on that one. So the next approach, and this ties it all the way back to the last talk we had and been talking a little bit about, is we could just accept on faith that what we perceive is real. We could essentially have like a dogma or a belief in our heads about that and sort of treat that as, perception is reality, basically, right?
So taking our own perceptions.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, this is dangerous in a slightly more subtle and not obvious way.
I see. So you're highlighting two extremes.
These are the two extremes I'm starting with.
Okay. I like it. So I can actually perfectly highlight an example of
Go
how
ahead.
This is dangerous. For example, if you do perceive a ghost and you automatically think it's real, you start ascribing these concepts of meaning to it before you even know what it is that you're seeing, you can get sucked down. You become one of those homeless people on the streets pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So, but I want to hear what your other solutions are before I go down.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Maybe we can come back to that if you have any thoughts. So the next approach we could take is you could try and come up with some sort of logical counter argument for this proposal. You could try and refute the claim itself, right?
Refute your own perception?
Well, refute that you would kind of logically prove, not on dogma, but somehow prove with logic that we can trust our perceptions.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, so this is kind of, it's a more toned down version of your second.
Right. It's trying to accept the premise, but it's also trying to do it in a way that's consistent logically, so you're not doing it just purely based on dogma.
Right.
And this has been tried, by the way. I didn't take too many notes on all the different approaches because I couldn't find one that I found compelling. It's like I said, there's no evidence I can think of that you could come up with that's not consistent with the view that the premise is already true, that you can be deceived basically by your perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a dead end, but it's an approach that people have taken before.
Mm-hmm. What is it? This is kind of a side note, but what is the difference between perceptions and experience?
Oh man, those two are so closely related that I like in terms of the different pieces of like how you see reality. I like to think of sensations as being the raw sensory input, like the nerves you have that feel things, or all the different stuff in your body that senses things. And then I like to think of when you feed that into your brain, the process of interpreting that, like filtering and everything, as being perception. I'm not sure where experience fits into that.
Mm-hmm. Well, God, I use the psychedelic example almost in every single sentence I say, but Joe Rogan had a really good quote where, he was talking about people who trip and they have those altered perceptions. And he's like, it doesn't matter whether what you're seeing is real or not. The experience is still the same. It still happens. So
right, yeah, I would say that the perception is kind of like is a factual thing, is true, is the knowledge, but the underlying the underlying sensations behind it could potentially not be true, if that makes sense, or like the world may not be as you are perceiving, is what I'm trying to say.
Right. Okay, so if I were to try and logically, well, let's take something that we both agree on. We're both sitting in chairs right now.
Yes.
So how would I, logically, instead of just taking it as a faith-based assumption, which is one extreme, that you're sitting in a chair, how would you articulate that we're sitting in chairs right now? Like, how would you logically walk someone through the fact that, yes, this is a chair?
I remember one of the arguments was around, like, because our brains can only think about the world in a certain way, like that is logically consistent, that necessarily that must be the nature of reality, because our brains wouldn't, what do you call it? I'm not good at articulating this because this isn't really my point of view, but that our brains wouldn't be able to perceive the world in a way that's not real, because it would give us a disadvantage evolutionary, like in terms of our evolution and everything like that. So it would necessarily have to be that our brains work in a way that's consistent with reality, if that makes sense.
So that means that in an essence, the pinnacle of perception, it's impossible to perceive something that's not there. I can communicate something in a flawed way, but the act of perceiving something, it's impossible to actually perceive something that's not there.
Yeah, so that if you go down that road, you get into a murky area in terms of how do you then define reality, right?
Well, you identify reality through communication, and that's where the flaw is.
Yeah. Okay, so there's one more approach left, which in case you haven't been keeping track, this is the one I tend to subscribe to the most. And so this is kind of a middle ground between several different approaches in a way, and this is basically we can accept basically, so we can accept the foundations of the premise, but not the ultimate conclusion of it, which is basically accept that we can't have certainty in our knowledge, but that we could have a softer softer version of knowledge, which is basically we can know, regardless of how we are getting those perceptions, whether those are based in reality or not, we can still know within the system that we are perceiving, like what the rules are, basically. So we can still deduce based on our perceptions how that world is operating, right? Now, there's problems with that, obviously, because now that means, and what's funny about this is, well, let me tell you what the problems are. So the problems are that the rules could change at any time, right? Because if we are being fed those perceptions by, like, the Matrix or, some brain in a vat, like, they could change those at any time and rip the rug out from under us. But the truth is that we don't, even if we are living in the real world, quote unquote, there's no, like, only on faith do we believe that the rules aren't going to change based on some underlying principle that we don't understand in physics. Like, someday, like, the world could just dramatically change because we don't have enough complete knowledge of how the world works, right? So I don't see that as a problem necessarily.
Well, that of the four solutions that you outlined, that was the first one where I heard you mention the word acceptance, which was, as a solution, was actually something that I was kind of preconceiving in my own head as what a solution might be. Yeah. So I was glad that you came to that. I think we're in consensus in that acceptance of the experience is intrinsic to finding meaning within your perception.
Right. Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that there's not even necessarily a right or a wrong answer. There's just whatever answer, like, you can accept, right? I'm using acceptance there again, but whatever you can build a story in your mind around. And to me, based on the way that I like to perceive the world, that's the story I like to tell myself, basically, is that, yeah, I understand that there's reasons to be skeptical. I have all of this scientific knowledge that tells me that, the world, our perceptions of the world are necessarily not perfect, right? But I don't want that to, like, let me fall into the, either of the extremes in terms of nihilism or dogmatic approaches. I want to still take a logical approach to things and just use reason to find what the limits are of what I can know based off of that based off of the flaws in the way I perceive the world, right?
Right.